I think we need to contemplate is we have seen where schools are, where these things occur. We have always seen where people tend to go where they don't think they will be stopped from doing their action, whether it be in Colorado to a movie theater, or in this case to an elementary school, knowing that they did not have a security guard in place. We generally do not have police officers in elementary schools. I think people who are perpetrators like this, he's not a man who used a gun on a regular basis. We're going to have to harden our schools.
You did suggest earlier that you might contemplate a change on the gun laws, and yet you seem to be rowing back on that now. Are you or are you not contemplating a change now?
What I'm contemplating is that the arrangements of how we look at the problem. I don't believe the problem is the gun. I believe the problem is the person who used a gun to perpetrate this terrible crime. And I think if we find people, pay attention to people, are able to utilize our strengths of talking. For instance, this young man probably thought it could never happen in Uvalde, Texas. It could happen anywhere, but in particular, almost every one of these people give some notice to someone else about what they're doing. Almost every single circumstance.
The Republican Congressman Pete Sessions. Well, let's get another view from someone who knows from bitter experience what it's like to be shot and now regularly treats the victims of gun crime. Dr. Joe Sokran is Director of Emergency General Surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and he's on the line now. Welcome to NewsHour, Dr. Sokran. You were shot when you were just 17, I think. Just outline for us what happened.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And as you allude to, I come to this, discussion having, been a survivor of gun violence when I was 17. I was nearly killed after I was shot in the throat with a .38 caliber bullet. And I went from being a healthy high school teenager to essentially collateral damage. And I was lucky enough to be one of those individuals that was given a second chance and really have tried to take this second chance to impact the lives of other people, and hence the work I'm doing today.
So a spur to action for you. Let's just address some of what we've just heard. Congressman Sessions effectively used the argument that it's not guns that kill people, it's people that kill people, often trotted out. You treat victims all the time. What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, first let me just say that we should all feel terrible about what's happened this week yet again. We continue to wake up in America with this revolving tragedy that unfolds time and time again. And I'm absolutely horrified, I'm angry, I'm heartbroken, and I just refuse to believe that this is the best that we can do. What we heard just a few minutes ago is typical partisan politics. And I think that this lack of inaction to ensure that people have the right to live and to be safe is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, you literally cannot even go to school in America without worrying about whether or not you're going to be shot. And I think there are a variety of measures, like any other complex public health problem, that can and must be implemented in order to save lives.
What's your number one?
So, everyone always asks that, and here's the thing with that question, is there is no one solution, right? Why? Because it requires a multifaceted, multi-sectoral approach. But what can we do? We can expand the universal background checks. We can ensure that we have extreme risk protection orders. You heard the congressman talking about, people that maybe knew that this person had some issues going on. Well, Texas doesn't have an extreme risk protection order, as an example. We can ensure that we're funding gun violence prevention research. We can have the administration call on the Surgeon General to commission a report on gun violence prevention that's never been done. The president could also direct the Secretary of Health to declare a public health emergency around gun violence prevention, similar to what's been done around opioids.
Can I just ask you this, because we're slightly limited for time, Dr. Sokran, but to those like the young men we heard in Uvalde in the report we played, who say if people want to do harm, want to get a gun, they'll always be able to.
Yeah, look, this whole notion and the type of
service to our vibrant community. We're the largest local media company with 4 TV stations and 5 radio channels, and the only public media station in the country owned by 21 local school divisions. And we have some openings to join our team. If you'd like to come to work each day knowing you're making a difference in the community, visit whro.org/jobs today.
Support comes from Broadway in Norfolk, presenting Hamilton, Cats, Jesus Christ Superstar, and more this upcoming season at Chrysler Hall. Season packages available at BroadwayInNorfolk.com.
This is James Menendez with News Outline from the BBC. We're going to head to Pakistan now in a rather toxic mix of political turmoil and violence on the streets and a looming economic crisis that's making many people very nervous. On Wednesday, the former Prime Minister Imran Khan and thousands of his supporters descended on the capital Islamabad to demand new elections. The government tried to block roads into the city but were forced to allow the protesters through after the Supreme Court intervened. Well, that led to clashes between them and the police that seem replicated in other cities too. Mr. Khan was ousted from power last month after a confidence vote in Parliament orchestrated by Pakistan's 2 other main parties. He's now called off any further protests but says they'll resume if the government doesn't call an election within 6 days.
I want to send a message to this important government. I'm giving you 6 days. Announce the election within 6 days. Announce the election in June and dissolve the assembly. If you don't do it after 6 days, I will take my whole nation to Islamabad.
So, how much of a threat to Pakistan's stability is all this? A question for political analyst Amber Shamsi in Karachi.
Imran Khan determined to pursue his agenda of forcing the government to call for early elections, and neither seem to be willing to sit at the negotiating table. Meanwhile, inflation in Pakistan is very high. Pakistan is trying to restart an IMF program, and most economists say that at the moment our foreign currency reserves, we only have them for about 4 weeks, which essentially means that you have a really terrible cocktail mix of populist politics, confrontational politics, street politics, as well as a very dire economic situation. A lot of people in Pakistan, myself included, are worried that Pakistan is heading towards what happened in Sri Lanka.
But on the politics, Imran Khan's able to muster a crowd, but I just wonder how much support he has at the moment. If, I suspect this won't happen, but if there were to be an election, his demands were fulfilled, would he actually be able to win it?
Well, that's a risk or the bet that, or the gamble that Imran Khan is taking. So in 2018, when Imran Khan came into power, his was also a coalition government, and his party got about a third of the popular vote. So essentially what this means is that out of the total number of the voting population, about 19% of people voted for Imran Khan, whereas the current 2 parties that are part of this coalition government got far more than him. The divide is very clear. The divide is urban versus rural. The 2 dynasties, or the 2 parties in the coalition government at the moment, have more of a rural vote bank. We must also not forget that there have been many accusations of the establishment helping Imran Khan come to power in 2018. So Imran Khan, through rallying his supporters, through using the religion card as it's called, or describing this struggle for his party to come back into power through elections as a jihad, he's used a lot of religious terminology. He's used foreign conspiracy, essentially tapping into the anti-US sentiment in Pakistan as well. And he's hoping that that kind of sort of makes up for the support that he got through the military establishment in 2018. It remains to be seen whether the elections will be free and fair, whether this transition will actually bring Pakistan any stability, because elections, of course, as you know, is a very expensive business, and Imran Khan seems to be in no mood to accept anything less than being voted back into power. But what if he's not satisfied with the results? What then? And so I don't think there's any immediate relief from political instability in either case.
It sounds though like the real battleground is the economy, and from what you were saying earlier, Pakistan's about to run out of money.
Yes, that's actually pretty crucial, because we we've seen over the last 3-4 years while Imran Khan was in government, he's changed finance ministers several times. Inflation remained very, very high. And while the current account deficit reduced a little, the COVID-19 pandemic and those shocks also affected, there were no basic reforms that needed to be done in order for the economy to perform better, which is essentially that you have more exports and fewer imports. The Imran Khan government had negotiated a deal with the IMF, and then he reneged on those promises. His government was meant to raise federal subsidies. He essentially took those back because he said, I wanted to give relief to the public. So the current government is in a bind because it desperately needs an IMF program to be revived.
Amber Shamsi talking to me from Greenwich. Now, one image comes to mind if I mention the Dutch capital, Amsterdam. Is it canals, gables and world-class museums? Or is it sex and cafes selling cannabis? Plenty of tourists go there for the latter, but the city's mayor wants to change that. She's pushing ahead with plans to ban visitors from the more than 150 cannabis coffee shops. And Holigan's been finding out more.
Tulips sway in rainbow displays, cyclists swerve, oblivious tourists outside the Rijksmuseum. This is the side of the city the council wants you to see. Amsterdam's mayor, Femke Halsema, is trying to deter people drawn in by the other things like sex and drugs. Here, these attractions exist side by side. Just around the corner, women strike provocative poses in red-lit rooms. The local authorities blame the red light district and cannabis cafes for attracting the foreign visitors responsible for the antisocial behaviour. This forcing families like the Vissers to consider moving out of their canal-side homes.
There are days that it's too crowded. I can't even get through there by my bike.
This is Micah.
You get more people who have visited the coffee shop when it's nice weather and you just smell, because the smell comes in the house.
I'm distracted by a tourist barge cruising by on the canal outside.
The beautiful boys.
Do you feel like you're living in a zoo?
We live in a museum.
It's boat after boat after boat. 10 of those boats per hour.
10 an hour. Those are not the people who are coming just for the drugs.
No.
Mark Visser says it's not the dope smokers, but binge drinkers who cause the real nuisance.
They get noisy and they are getting aggressive. People go to a coffee shop, smoke hashies, and get stoned and are most of the times relaxed.
People caught drinking on the street in Amsterdam can now be fined 95 euros. Their niece, Laura, is visiting from Austria.
I come to Amsterdam because I like the food, I like the museums, I like walking around, I like sitting here and watching people walk by, and I'm not coming for the drugs. And this is something that's weird when I tell my friends at home.
Inside the Strainhatcher's Cannabis Cafe, small leafy green bundles of amnesia haze are being weighed out on silver scales. Coffee shop entrepreneurs like Joachim Helms argue plans to ban foreign guests from these establishments are misguided.
It's one of the quick fix that they think is a contribution to the solution, but in actual fact it will be a big disaster. It's sometimes hard to hear that Amsterdam does not want certain tourism.
Amsterdam's liberal, tolerant reputation is a magnet for people from across the globe, especially from the LGBTQ community.
It's one of the reasons Ben Farrell made this his home, but he's worried about its future.
I think that we're in danger of trying to sanitize the city too much, and it will become like any other European capital. I think the things that make it unique are the things that sometimes people also hate about the city as well. I do agree that there are problems that need to be addressed. Banning tourists from smoking in coffee shops is kind of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut a little bit. It feels quite elitist in a way to distinguish between the right kind of tourist and the wrong kind of tourist.
Amsterdam City Council doesn't have the power to limit the budget flights that many locals blame for the over-tourism. Their challenge is to manage the flow without sacrificing the features that make this European capital so unique.
Anna Holigan reporting there from Amsterdam. You're listening to News Hour. Do stay with us. Lots more coming up in the second half of the programme. Don't go away.
Distribution of BBC NewsHour in the U.S. is supported by Aspiration, a digital banking alternative designed for people who care about the environment. Customers can plant a tree with every swipe of their debit card to offset their carbon footprint. Aspiration.com/green. And the Financial Times. FT journalists are exploring what climate change and a world disrupted by conflict mean for the future of fossil fuels at ft.com/newagenda.
Support comes from Virginia Eye Consultants, committed to vision care in Hampton Roads, specializing in retina, glaucoma, dry eye, LASIK, and laser cataract surgery, and proud supporters of WHRO's The Voice. More at virginiaeyeconsultants.com.
Amid a global food crisis, Ukraine accuses Russia of stealing its grain and selling it abroad. Also, why the new Australian government is worried about China's ambitions in the South Pacific, and how technology is helping the aging pop superstars of ABBA recreate their heyday live on stage. All that's coming up after the news.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. Chancellor Scholz of Germany says Russia will not win its war with Ukraine, and President Putin must not be allowed to dictate peace terms. On Wednesday, President Zelensky rebuked some in the West for suggesting Ukrainian territorial losses were inevitable to secure peace. The British government is imposing a temporary levy on energy companies to alleviate the rising cost of living after long resisting such a move. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, said the gas and oil sectors would face a windfall tax of 25%. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, on a visit to the Solomon Islands, says China has no intention of building a military base in the Pacific country. Beijing recently signed a security pact with the Solomons, despite objections from Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. The former president of the Louvre Museum in Paris has been charged with conspiring to hide the origins of antiquities suspected to have been removed from Egypt during the Arab Spring uprisings. Judicial sources say Jean-Luc Martinez was charged with complicity in fraud. The United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Afghanistan, Richard Bennett, has said the Taliban government's restrictions on women were aimed at making them invisible in Afghan society. Mr. Bennett was speaking to reporters in Kabul at the end of an 11-day visit. Nigerian police have arrested the alleged head of an international cybercrime syndicate after a year-long investigation. According to Interpol, the syndicate targeted both companies and individuals through phishing campaigns and schemes to compromise business emails. The Swedish pop superstars ABBA are preparing for their first public stage performance in more than 40 years. Fans at the premiere in London will hear the quartet's real voices, but they'll see only holograms of the band. BBC News.
Welcome back to NewsHour. Australia's new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has sounded a warning about China's efforts to increase its influence in the South Pacific, which Canberra's long regarded as its backyard. He wants the country to step up its own engagement in the region and has sent his foreign minister to Fiji. Meanwhile, China's top diplomat is in the Solomon Islands, the start of a tour of Pacific Island states. Beijing recently signed a new and secretive security pact with the Solomons that denies any plan to build a military base there.